All right, so what I want to talk today about is taking a thesis and then working uh, to find the essay's organization based off the logic of the thesis. So I'm going to provide you guys with a couple sample theses that you can use in your essay, but you don't have to. And this would be the sample thesis for prompt 3. All right, and what I've written here is although both speakers are seen as isolated and tormented, the speaker in Frost's poem seems to understand that almost everyone has this feeling at times. As a result, the tone of Frost's poem is more hopeful than Eliot's. So, first, this thesis, the reason why I'm using it as an example is it has the elements that I'd like to see in your thesis, which are first, here is a similarity, but it's specific. Don't just say similarities and differences. Similarity. And here's a specific difference. And then here is why that matters. This is these are the three things that your thesis. Again, you can use my theses that I'm going to give you guys. But if you want to create your own, which I also recommend, if you want to do that, try to have these elements in your thesis. So first, maybe we can get rid of this. You can always go back on the video and check that out. So now that we have this thesis and it's doing these three things that I just discussed, this thesis is going to give you the structure of your essay. So your essay is going to first have to try to prove this first element. And this is the first then this would be the second element to prove. And then here's a third element to prove. Now I am not saying do a 5-paragraph essay. This just happens to have 3 things. But just because there are 3 larger elements, look at this as if it's an outline. So like if speakers are similar. So this first element, if you were to think about your essay as in terms of sections, the first thing you need to prove that they are similar in the sense that they're isolated and tormented, but that doesn't mean it's just one paragraph. You should break this up into multiple paragraphs. So first, you could look at Eliot, and you could look at Eliot's speaker, and you could look at relationship with surroundings or environment. All right. And I'm going to shorten relationship to maybe just an R with others. And like when you look at, and so these all could be paragraphs, by the way. So that could be a paragraph where you look at his surroundings, and maybe it's even 2 paragraphs, kind of the seedy neighborhoods and the upscale neighborhood or the upscale parties. So those could be 2 paragraphs, right? The relationship that the speaker has with others, that could be a couple paragraphs. Maybe it's the women, definitely. Maybe it's the mermaids too at the end. Maybe that's something you want to look at. You also might want to look at the relationship with self. And so that, these are all things that could be paragraphs. So even though this is one section to explain how he's isolated and tormented, we can break up that one section into a bunch of different smaller paragraphs. Then we're going to have to look at Frost and try to do something similar. Because if we're comparing and contrasting, we have to look at similar things. So again, you should look at surroundings. Surroundings. You should look at others. We have the Watchmen. And we should look at self. And again, these could be separate paragraphs, and there might be kind of subcategories, all right? And so all of this right here, this essay structure, is kind of embedded in this first phrase in the thesis, all right? So in order to prove this thesis, the first thing you have to do is prove this idea. In order to prove this idea, we have to look at these types of specifics, all right? The second thing we need to try to do is try to argue, if we're going to prove this thesis, the speakers are different. Eliot has no hope. Right, we could try to prove that, and maybe we try to prove that in a variety of different ways. But then we have Frost, and then for Frost, I mean, one thing I'm going to look at for Frost, we talked about, if you watched that video that I sent about Frost, is the present perfect grammar. All the I have looked and I have walked, and all the present perfect grammar and what that implies, which you should watch that video if you haven't yet. The title, which implies some sort of acquaintance. And then the meter that we talked about, the terza rima. So again, what we're going to prove in these paragraphs, and again, each section represents multiple paragraphs. Again, it's embedded in the thesis. All right, and that's what I want you to start seeing is, once you have a thesis, the essay structure directly stems from that thesis. And there's all these things that are kind of implied and that need to be fleshed out in the essay. And so that's why I'm making this video. The last thing I would do is kind of say, the last section, right, is the so what, which is that even though Eliot's poem isn't terribly uplifting, it is it's more hopeful. All right, so that, again, that's the third section. Maybe there's not as much there. Maybe you look at Eliot as not hopeful, and then Frost, maybe Frost, more hopeful tone. So I hope this is helpful. The point of the little video is just to show how we're going to try to unpack all the implications of the thesis. Email me with questions. I'm happy to help.